Something happened inside that number 19 car during the final 40 laps of Saturday night's race at Richmond Raceway. Something that turned what looked like a career-defining victory for Chase Briscoe into one of the most painful heartbreaks of his career. For 171 laps, Briscoe had the fastest car on the track. He had finally put himself in position to erase nearly a decade of frustration at a track that had beaten him over and over again. He was less than 40 laps away from finally changing the story. And then, in a matter of seconds, everything started falling apart. His brakes began fading, his car got loose, his 3-second lead disappeared. And by the time the checkered flag finally waved, Briscoe was left wondering how a race he had seemingly controlled for most of the night had slipped through his fingers. What makes this result even harder to accept is exactly how close he actually came before it all slipped away in that final run. This wasn't a race where Briscoe simply got beaten from the beginning. This wasn't a night where he struggled to keep up with the leaders. He had the car, he had the speed, he had the lead. He had everything he needed to finally silence the Richmond curse. But somehow, when the race reached the moment that mattered most, it all disappeared. Before we get into the full story, welcome back to NASCAR Hub. If you enjoy real NASCAR breakdowns, race analysis, driver reactions, and the stories happening behind the numbers, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps NASCAR Hub keep bringing you these race breakdowns every single week. This was Richmond Raceway, the track that had beaten Chase Briscoe 9 times in a row. Across 9 previous starts, he had 0 top 10 finishes, and his best result ever at this track was 11th place. This wasn't just bad luck stacking up year after year. It was a psychological weight he carried into every single lap he ran there, race after race, season after season. He called it a real struggle and admitted it felt weird to be mad running second at a place where he had never even cracked the top 10 before that night. His crew chief, James Small, added another layer to this curse, saying, "The number 19 team has lost far more races here than we've won, and we've won quite a lot." That single line planted the idea that Richmond wasn't just unlucky for Briscoe individually, it was cursed for the entire number 19 car itself, no matter which driver happened to be behind the wheel of it. That history matters here, because it's the exact history Joe Gibbs Racing and the number 19 car dragged into Saturday night, and it's the same history that would come right back up once the race was actually over. Then Saturday night arrived, and for a while it genuinely looked like the curse was finally about to be broken. Briscoe started second on the grid, passed pole sitter Ryan Blaney on lap 1, and led his very first lap ever at Richmond Raceway in his entire career. By the time the night was over, he had led 171 of 400 laps, a race high total, more laps than anyone else on the track that night. He described being boxed in by a wall of Penske cars for much of the race, saying, "I thought I was in a Penske sandwich there for much of the race and still came out ahead of every single one of them by the time the stages ended." Fans watching live were already debating in real time whether this was finally the night Richmond let him through. And considering everything Briscoe had gone through at this track, it was easy to understand why. For nearly a decade, Richmond had been a place where something always seemed to go wrong. A bad finish, a missed opportunity, a frustrating result. Something always seemed to stand between Briscoe and a breakthrough. But on this particular Saturday night, the story appeared to be changing right in front of everyone. With 171 laps led and clearly the best car on the racetrack for much of the night, everything pointed toward a long-awaited win that had eluded him for nearly a decade. But inside the final 40 laps, that entire story changed in a matter of seconds. Briscoe had built a 3-second cushion over the field, and it evaporated almost instantly. In his own words, he started losing brakes, got really loose, and gave up the entire lead in a single run around the racetrack. That detail is what makes this loss so painful. He wasn't saying that Joey Logano suddenly found a dramatically faster car. He wasn't saying he simply got outdriven from the beginning of the final stint. Briscoe was pointing directly at the mechanical failure that suddenly changed everything. He was explicit about exactly what that mechanical failure cost him. If he'd had even a small amount of that brake performance left, he believes he wins the race outright. Think about that for a second. After leading 171 laps, after finally breaking through at a track that had tormented him for years, Briscoe was potentially just a few laps of normal brake performance away from standing in victory lane. Instead, his lead disappeared, and at the exact same moment in the number 22 car, Joey Logano's crew chief Paul Wolf's decisive call to pit the instant Logano took the lead. It was a strategy move that put Logano out front at exactly the right time, and ultimately allowed him to never relinquish that position again. One mechanical issue on one car, one perfectly timed pit call on another. Two completely different outcomes for two drivers fighting for the exact same win. The closing laps delivered maximum suspense for anyone watching from home or from the grandstands. Briscoe clawed back lap after lap, closing the gap all the way to the finish line, ultimately losing by just 0.392 seconds after everything he had thrown at Logano over that final run. Less than half a second, after 400 laps, after leading 171 of them, after spending most of the night looking like the driver who was finally going to break through. His rawest reaction afterwards carried the weight of a man who still believed, deep down, that he had the faster car underneath him in that exact moment. "I don't know what more I needed. I thought that last run I was a little bit better than him." That is a driver who, even after losing by less than half a second, was convinced he had Logano's number in those final moments, and still somehow couldn't complete the pass for the win at the very end of a 400-lap race. And that's what makes this result so difficult to categorize. Was Briscoe simply beaten, or did he lose a race that he had already done enough to win? The online reaction split almost immediately after the race went final. In the race day thread, one fan pointed out there were several legitimate, clean on-track passes for the lead that night, arguing that the two best cars on the racetrack ended up at the front specifically because the racing itself was genuine, not lucky or manufactured. Another fan countered that green flag strategy stops on a short track like Richmond had taken away the ability to actually pass for the lead anymore, turning what should have been a straight fight into a strategy call decided on pit road instead. That ongoing debate mirrors the exact tension running through this entire result. Was this pure, unfiltered racing between Briscoe and Logano, or did strategy quietly decide the outcome before the checkered flag ever came out? Neither side backed down in that thread, and by the next morning, the debate had spread well beyond that single race day discussion into wider conversations about how short-track strategy has changed the way these final lap battles actually play out. Back in the garage after the race, James Small didn't sugarcoat what had just happened to his team.
His full reaction carried real, unmistakable weight. So second in the scheme of things is a great result, but right now it's really disappointing because we had the better car and we didn't win. That is not spin from a crew chief trying to soften the blow for the cameras. That is a crew chief openly admitting on the record that the team had every tool needed to beat Logano that night and still failed to close it out when it mattered most. And Briscoe himself, without being prompted by a single reporter in that moment, brought up an even bigger comparison. He pointed directly to Martin Truex Jr.'s long history at Richmond in that exact same number 19 car, where dominant race-leading runs repeatedly failed to convert into actual wins over the years at this specific track. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Is this still the same Richmond curse from years past, simply wearing a different driver's name on the door of the car this time around? Because the similarities are difficult to ignore. The number 19 car was fast. The number 19 car led a huge portion of the race. The number 19 car looked capable of winning. And once again, Richmond found a way to keep that trophy out of its hands. Despite the heartbreaking loss to Logano, Saturday night still carried enormous stakes far beyond the finish line itself. Briscoe had been in real danger of being caught in the championship point standings by Tyler Reddick heading into that Richmond weekend, with the gap between them shrinking race by race. Instead, he walked away locking in 5th place in the overall standings and clinched his chase spot outright with his 6th top 10 finishes in the last 7 races run. Briscoe called it directly what it actually was, a huge points night, in the same breath as calling the loss itself frustrating because they had one slip away like that. And that's the strange thing about this result. From the outside, finishing second at Richmond should look like a massive success for a driver who had never previously finished inside the top 10 there. From Briscoe's perspective, however, it felt like something much bigger had been taken away. Because he didn't just finish second, he came painfully close to winning. He had the dominant car, He had the lead, he had the momentum, and for most of the night, he looked like the driver who had finally figured Richmond out. Then the brakes began fading. The lead disappeared. Logano's strategy worked, and suddenly the number 19 team was standing in the exact same place it had found itself so many times before at Richmond, wondering what could have been. With only 2 regular season races left on the schedule before the chase officially begins, the margins separating these championship contenders remain razor thin, and a result like this one carries weight that stretches far beyond a single Saturday night under the lights at Richmond Raceway. Maybe this was another chapter in the Richmond curse. Maybe it was simply a mechanical failure at the worst possible moment. Maybe Joey Logano and Paul Wolfe made the better strategic decision when the opportunity appeared. Or maybe all 3 things are true at the same time. Because if Chase Briscoe really did have the fastest car when it mattered most, then this wasn't a night where the number 19 team proved it couldn't win. It may have been a night that proved just how close this team actually is to becoming a championship threat. So which is it? A team that came up short against Logano exactly when it mattered most? Or a team that's one bad brake rotor, one bad break, or one missed opportunity away from being completely unstoppable heading straight into the chase? Tell me exactly what you think really happened in those final 40 laps down in the comments section below. And if this breakdown actually helped you understand the full story behind Briscoe and Logano at Richmond, take a second to share it with another NASCAR fan who needs to see this exact breakdown too. If you enjoy real NASCAR breakdowns like this, you'll like what's coming next. And before you go, make sure you're subscribed to NASCAR Hub because we're bringing you more race breakdowns, driver reactions, controversial moments, and the stories behind the headlines all season long.